You didn't vote for it. Nobody asked you. There was no bill, no debate, no press conference. But right now, as you're watching this, a portion of everything you've earned, everything you've saved, everything you're planning to spend, is quietly being taken from you. Not by a thief, not by a scammer, by the system you were told to trust. It's called inflation, and you probably think you already understand it. You don't. Not fully. Because if you did, you'd be a lot angrier than you are right now. Most people hear inflation and they think of grocery prices, gas, rent, the vague feeling that things cost more than they used to. That's true, but that framing is also a trap because it makes inflation feel like a weather event, something that just happens, like rain, like nobody's responsible. Here's the thing nobody says out loud. Inflation doesn't just happen, it's produced, and the people who produce it don't pay for it the way you do. That's the story. Let's go back to basics, but not the textbook version. When there's more money chasing the same amount of goods, prices rise. Simple enough. But where does the extra money come from? In the United States, money doesn't just appear. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, controls the money supply. And for decades, every time the economy hit a rough patch, the Fed's answer was the same. Print more, inject liquidity, make borrowing cheap. 2008 financial crisis? They printed. 2020 pandemic? They printed, aggressively. Between 2020 and 2022, the U.S. money supply grew by roughly 40%, more than it had in the previous several decades combined. That money went somewhere, and where it went and where it didn't go is the uncomfortable part. Here's how the mechanism actually works. When the Fed creates new money, it doesn't airdrop it equally to every American. It enters the financial system through banks, through bond markets, through asset purchases. The people closest to that spigot, large financial institutions, corporations, wealthy investors, they get access to the new money first when prices are still low. By the time that money filters down to wages, to consumer spending, to your paycheck, prices have already moved. You're spending the new money in a world where things already cost more. Economists have a name for this effect, the Cantillon Effect, named after an 18th century economist named Richard Cantillon, who noticed it centuries before the Federal Reserve existed. Those nearest the money creation get richer. Those furthest from it, workers, savers, people with cash and checking accounts, they pay the bill. Nobody voted for this arrangement. It's just how the plumbing works. Now let's talk about the math nobody puts on a billboard. If inflation runs at 7%, which it did in the US in 2021 and 2022, and your savings account is earning 0.5% interest, you are losing money. Not theoretically, actually. A dollar that sits still for 10 years at 3% annual inflation is worth about 74 cents in real purchasing power. You didn't lose it to a bad investment. You didn't lose it to a crash. You lost it by doing nothing, by being responsible, by saving. The system, in a very real sense, penalizes patience. And here's the absurdity that most people gloss over. Income taxes are paid on nominal gains. If your investment grew 7%, but inflation was also 7%, you made nothing in real terms. You broke even. But the IRS will still tax that 7% as income. You pay taxes on gains that didn't exist, on wealth you didn't accumulate, on a number that looks like progress, but isn't. Meanwhile, and this is where it gets particularly uncomfortable, debt works in reverse. When inflation rises, the real value of debt falls. A mortgage taken out for $400,000 becomes easier to service when wages and prices both rise because you're paying it back in cheaper dollars. Governments know this too. The U.S. national debt is, as of now, over $34 trillion. One of the least painful ways to manage that debt is to let inflation quietly erode its real value over time. Governments have been doing this for centuries. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's fiscal history. But here's who bears that cost. Not the government. The people holding government bonds, the people keeping savings in cash, the fixed income retirees, the middle class that was told saving was the responsible thing to do. They subsidize the debt without ever being asked. This is the part where most videos would tell you what to do about it. Buy gold, buy crypto, invest in index funds. Here's your 5-step inflation survival guide. We're not doing that. Not because those conversations don't matter, but because they skip the more important question. If inflation is effectively a tax on cash, on savings, on patience, then who authorized it? In a democracy, taxes require votes, legislation, public debate. Politicians put their names on tax bills. They're held accountable. They can lose their seats over it. But the Federal Reserve is not elected. Its chair is appointed. Its decisions happen in committee rooms, not on ballots. And its most consequential decisions that reshape the real value of every dollar in every American's wallet, happen without a single public vote. That's not an argument for or against the Federal Reserve existing. Central banks serve a real function in complex economies. That much is not in dispute. But it does raise a question that doesn't get asked enough. At what point does monetary policy become redistribution? At what point does the invisible erosion of purchasing power, consistent, structural, year after year, deserve the same scrutiny we give to income tax, to corporate tax, to the debates that get entire news cycles? Inflation averaged around 3.8% annually in the U.S. over the last 2 decades. That sounds manageable, small even. Compound it over 30 years, and a dollar becomes worth about 32 cents. That's not a rounding error. That's the slow, quiet transfer of wealth from savers to borrowers, from workers to asset holders, from people with cash to people with things. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The question is, designed for whom? Nobody will campaign on that question. Nobody will run an ad about the Cantillon Effect. And so the tax continues, invisible, automatic, and almost impossible to opt out of. Paid by people who never saw a ballot, never signed a form, never agreed to anything. They just saved their money and wondered why it felt like it was disappearing.